It's 50-year anniversary this week of the Memphis sanitation strike. And that was what Martin Luther King was doing in Memphis. He was going down to stand up for those sanitation workers, and when he got killed. And so Reverend William Barber and Reverend Liz Theoharis, they are the co-chairs of the Poor People's Campaign, and that's a national call for moral revival. Now, Barber, he's the president of the North Carolina NAACP, and Theoharis is the co-director of the Cairo Center for Religious Rights and Social Justice. And they wrote an article for CNN that commemorates, this is Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign. So right there's Dr. Martin Luther King. He displays the poster to be used during his Poor People's Campaign, March 4th, 1968, 1 month before he was shot to death by a sniper. So let's remember that, Martin Luther King wasn't just for civil rights, but he was also for economic rights, and he was anti-war. And when he went against the war is when he really got in trouble. That's when I think they allowed him to be killed, because before then he wasn't. So they wrote this article on CNN, and I just want to go through some of it with you right now because I think it's interesting. 50 years ago today, hundreds of black sanitation workers in Memphis walked off their jobs after two of their brothers were crushed to death by their truck's faulty compactor. For more than 60 days, the striking workers made daily marches from the local church to City Hall wearing signs that declared, "I am a man." I've seen those pictures of those guys doing that. Their demands were simple. They wanted a wage they could live on, the recognition of their union, and the basic dignity and respect all of us should be afforded as children of God. And their struggle became an anchor of their original Poor People's Campaign, a cross-racial fusion movement led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others aimed at ending the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. Dr. King saw the workers' struggle for a living wage and a union as central to this effort and spoke of the cause in his final public speech in Memphis the day before an assassin's bullet stole him from us on April 4th, 1968. As leaders of the effort to carry on the unfinished work of the Poor People's Campaign, we view the fight for unions and living wages as central to our campaign as well. That is why the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, is joining thousands of fast food workers today as they march in Memphis, following in the footsteps of the sanitation workers who went on a strike 50 years ago and carrying their work forward. 5 decades after our country declared a war on poverty, it now fights a war against the poor. Today, 64 million Americans are paid less than $15 an hour, including roughly half of black workers and almost 60% of Latino workers. That is a stunning statistic. That is stunning. And what a way to put it. So 5 decades after we declared war on poverty, we're actually fighting a war on the poor, which is exact. So we just increased the military budget $160 billion over the next 2 years. And literally the same day Trump is announcing he's gonna cut food stamps. That's that SNAP, that new Blue Apron program. They're not gonna give you fresh fruit and vegetables anymore, and they're gonna give you all canned crap, and that's how they're gonna save money. So there's literally a war on the poor. That's what's happening. The systemic poverty and racism America faces today was not inevitable. It is the result of choices made by politicians and corporations. Rather than using their power to lift Americans out of poverty, politicians and corporations over the last 50 years have worked hand in hand to cut wages, cut jobs, and cut workers' freedom to stick together in a union. And our country's moral malady is only growing more severe. In recent years, from Alabama to Missouri, white state legislators have snatched raises away from workers fighting for higher pay by nullifying local minimum wage increases. The Trump administration and its enablers in Congress passed a grossly immoral bill that gives tax breaks to major corporations, and they plan to pay for it by shredding the safety net that protects our most vulnerable. Meanwhile, companies like McDonald's target poor communities and communities of color in their ads to customers, but pay the black and brown and poor white workers behind the counter so little they can't afford to feed themselves. More than half workers at $1 billion companies like McDonald's need public assistance. Isn't that unbelievable? So I was on Joe Rogan's podcast yesterday, which was great, and Joe Rogan, thankful to have him on. But we talked about unions, And he tells that story about, oh, in the auto industry, they used to have a guy that they used to have an 8-hour job done by 2 people. So every other day, one of the guys wouldn't work, but they would still be paid and logged in, and they'd make $100,000 a year. And so it's this excess of somehow the unions have the, and I'm like, yeah, but those jobs are gone. I don't know what you're talking about. Those jobs don't exist anymore. They went to Mexico. They effed over the workers. The workers are effed over. That isn't happening anymore. So this idea that people still have of workers, which is it's just ubiquitous. This idea that somehow unions are there to protect workers that want to be lazy. Even at Vox recently, that one of their writers said that. One of their frickin' journalists at Vox said that in a tweet, that he doesn't want a union because there's a lot of writers that want to use it as an excuse to be lazy. Like this idea, what's happening right now is workers are working their ass off and they're not sharing in the profits. That's been not happening since 1980. Okay?
Yeah, Cenk has shown that graph multiple times where from 1980, if you see the graph of worker productivity is going straight up. It's going up to the right and up and up. And workers' wages have just flatlined. So that gap between productivity and workers' wages is all the wealth that's generated that's going really to the 0.1%.
Yeah.
0.5%.
So if you're against unions, I think what you're really against is a caricature of the idea of what unions do.
Yeah, look, unions did engage in excesses, right? I mean, we see it even today with the police unions. Police unions protect like the worst of the bunch.
Yeah.
In their midst. So yes, do unions have issues? Of course they do. Every organization does. Doesn't mean that you have to destroy them and destroy every single worker. But now I think the pendulum has swung so far the other way where workers have so few rights and management and corporations have all the rights, all the privileges. And Reverend Barber is someone that I deeply admire.
Yes.
Because he is, look, like I said many times, I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in any kind of religion. But he is someone that adheres to the principles of Christianity. He's obsessed with helping the poor people, regardless of their color. And he's absolutely right that for the past 50 years, every institution in our society, from government to corporation and everything else, has worked to benefit the tiny few who control all the wealth and power. And we've criminalized being poor.
Yes.
Everything from,
we demonized and criminalized.
Yeah, so things like slashing taxes and trying to recoup the revenue, government revenue, by increasing fines and speeding tickets and fees for access to parks. Those are all regressive policies that really hurt the poorest of the poor.
Yeah. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this clip. There's a whole hour and a half of aggressive progressives waiting for you at the Young Turks Network. Become a member and get access to all the content.